Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I am going to be talking about my favorite books from 2022. 2022, very interesting year for me, and reading wise was, I'm gonna admit, mostly mid. There was some really great stuff that I read this year, but when it came to favorites or things that just really felt like they were top tier, for me, books weren't hitting, and was it me? Was it the books? I don't really know. But when it came to putting together my favorites list this year, I did the same thing I do every year, which is I went on my Goodreads page and I have a tag called favorites. And I just tag things as I go throughout the year. And then I look at that tag, see what's on there, and then cull it down to what I would say are my favorites. And so this year I had less than 10 books tagged, which I genuinely think does encapsulate this reading year for me. I decided I wasn't going to force myself to pick a certain number of books, but I was able to get the number down to 5. I feel like a good top 5 for 2022 makes the most sense. So yeah, even though the number of books that I read was a little bit lower and the number of books I considered favorites is a little bit lower, there were still some true gems and highlights throughout this year. So I'm going to go through my top 5 books of the year, and I'm just going to go through them in a chronological order of when I read them. So the first book on this list is These Precious Days by Ann Patchett. This is an essay collection, and I am a big fan of Ann Patchett. I've read a handful of her books at this point, and I've basically enjoyed all of them to a certain degree. Some of them I've absolutely loved. Some of them were more in the 3-star range, but overall, Ann Patchett is an author where if she comes out with something new, I'm going to check it out. These are all just essays on living and life. She talks about her family, her relationship with her husband. She talks about running a bookstore. She talks about different friendships that she has. And the title essay in this book, I don't want to spoil it for you, but if anything, just read that essay because it starts in one place and you think it's about one thing, but then by the end of it, it's about something completely different, and it is so beautiful and so moving. I would say that if you are someone who really enjoyed The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, this has a very similar vibe to it. It's a book that looks at the world with love and wonder and joy and optimism, and it's just so heartwarming. It made me feel so happy and so good at the end of it, and it was just fantastic. It was a 4.5-star read for me. If I had to pick one book out of the stack that I could easily recommend to everyone, it would be this book. Next up, I have Good Talk by Mira Jacob. This is a graphic memoir, and in this graphic memoir, Mira Jacob kind of looks at what it means to be an American. She talks about being a mom, and specifically the mom of someone who is mixed race and trying to raise a kid in this world that we currently live in. This memoir is inspired by a BuzzFeed article that she wrote that was entitled, I think, 37 Difficult Questions from My Mixed Race Son. And so she goes through these conversations and these questions that her son has had, and you see her also working through those questions and the ideas and the memories that it brings up and things like that. And she grapples with having conversations with her son about really difficult topics, and what should she expose her kid to, what should she not, all of these different things, having conversations about his identity and what that means. Again, it's earnest, it's moving, it's a little bit optimistic, but also extremely realistic. And there's a lot of really great, just nuggets of wisdom in here. And it's also a really nice graphic memoir because you can kind of take it in chunks and read a little bit here and there because it's broken up into these conversations or these memories that Mira Jacob is exploring. It's a book that I feel like everyone who has read it has really adored it, and so I had really high expectations going into it, and it actually lived up to those expectations. So yeah, add me to the chorus of people who absolutely adore this book. Next up, I have How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith. This is another nonfiction book. It's another kind of collection of essays, and in this book, what Clint Smith is doing is basically taking the reader to different parts of the United States that have had a critical role in United States, and specifically having to do with slavery and how slavery is basically a core part of why the United States is what it is. So in this essay collection, the first one is about Monticello and his experience visiting there, as well as the history behind it and how they do and don't talk about Thomas Jefferson's role with slavery. And he talks about going to the Whitney plantation, which is outside New Orleans, and it's one of the few like plantations in the South that actually honestly talks about the slave experience of being on a plantation, whereas like a lot of plantations kind of don't talk about it really. He talks about how New York was a core part of the slave trade, which was like crazy to me because like I knew nothing about any of this. There's just so much about this book that is covered. And the thing is like he starts with like some core things that like people may know about, but he goes so much deeper. And he also talks about it in a very personal way, like being a Black man visiting these places. And I think it provides a really good viewpoint into the way that we view our history here in the United States and the way we do and don't talk about things, the monuments that we've created, the landmarks that we've marked, but also what are we ignoring and things like that. And I just thought this essay collection was so well done. I also listened to this on audiobook and thought the audiobook was fantastic. It was read by Clint Smith himself. And yeah, I think that this is a really great also kind of like intro to nonfiction. If you're the type of person who doesn't read a lot of nonfiction, this would be a really great one to pick up. And yeah, I also adored this book, and there's a lot of other people who do as well. So yeah, definitely a book that also, again, lived up to the hype for me. Next up, I have Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. And if there was one book this year that really took me by surprise, it's this one. I had really low expectations for this book. Not that I didn't think it would be a good book, but I just thought it wouldn't be a good book for me. I kind of just assumed that this was going to be pretentious literary fiction. And to a certain degree it is, but it's the pretentious literary fiction that I can get along with. I ended up picking this one up because I decided to read through the entire Women's Prize shortlist, and I'm so glad I did that because otherwise I never would have picked up this book. In this story, you are following this woman named Martha who has an undiagnosed mental illness, and you see her at like various points in time. Like the book jumps around a little bit, but a lot of the book is also about like her relationship to her husband Patrick, but also her relationship to her sister and her parents and things like that. And so you see these sort of like key moments in her life. And the way the book is marketed, it sounds like it's going to be like this depressed woman who doesn't want to have children and like going through a difficult time in her marriage or something along those lines. But this book is really a lot more than that. It explores what it's like to suffer from a mental illness and how that really impacts a lot of your life and potentially in ways that no one really sees coming. Like there are like clear ways that a mental illness can affect someone's life, but there are also kind of these little ways that it really hinders your experiences, it hinders your relationships with other people and all of this other stuff. And I feel like this book did such a good job of going through these various life events and showcasing how Martha's mental illness impacted all of it, but also at the same time, like it doesn't use the mental illness as an excuse. Like Martha also just makes bad choices in her life sometimes, as everyone does. And you also see that, and you see sort of Martha reckoning with multitudes of things, but that includes like going and having an undiagnosed mental illness, but also like just realizing that her mental illness can't be an excuse for everything that she's done in her life that she doesn't like. The relationship between Martha and her sister is like so great. Like I feel like it's hard to find like good sibling relationships sometimes in books, and this one I thought was absolutely fantastic. I listened to this one on audio as well, and I adored it. Like it was an audiobook that I remember like listening to while going for walks, and I remember like purposefully going on longer walks just so I could listen to more of the audiobook. It was an absolutely great experience. So yeah, like if you are looking for a good book that looks at the complexities of human relationships, but also the complexities of having a mental illness, this is the book to pick up. It is so well done. All right, and the final book that I have to talk about is The Avant-Guards, Volume 1. A comic? I know. Like a straight up comic, not even like a graphic memoir, graphic novel, or anything like that. I adored this so much. This was a comic that I genuinely just picked up because I saw it at a comic book store and I liked the way it looked. Like I liked the art style. I generally like things that were put out by Boom Studios. So I decided to just take a jump and check it out, and I finally picked it up this year and I loved it. In this story, you are mainly following this character named Charlie who has transferred to an like basically a fine arts college, and she ends up joining like the basketball team, but the basketball team here is really terrible. There is this girl named Liv who is very enthusiastic about starting the basketball team, and she ends up convincing or joining up with the other like basically artsy colleges around the country to all join basketball teams, and they can all be basically in the same league. Charlie just happens to also be a really good basketball player. And so this is just the first volume, so there's only like 4 or 5 issues in here, but you get to see the beginnings of this team starting and the first couple games that they play and the beginnings of relationships between some of the characters. And even though it's only a couple of issues, I was just completely smitten with it, and I know for a fact I'm going to pick up the rest of them. I think that if you are someone who really enjoys comics like Giant Days, this is very similar in vibe to that, and especially like you're following kids in college and things like that. So yeah, it's a comic that I just completely adored. I didn't think I would like it as much as I did, and I'm very excited to pick up the rest of the volumes in this series. So yeah, those are my top 5 books of 2022. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of the books that I talked about here today, or if you have any questions or comments about any of the books that I talked about here, feel free to leave that down in the comment section as well. Otherwise, let me know what was your favorite read of 2022. Like I said, I would probably pick These Precious Days. Actually, I can't pick. All of these were great, but I feel like These Precious Days is kind of like the I would recommend to anyone pick, along with Good Talk. The rest of them feel a little bit more niche and specialized, but overall, these are all really fantastic reads, and I hope that maybe a couple of you will pick up one of these next year. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.